I'm Joney, the host of Empower.World podcast, and I'm excited to introduce you to Sam. Sam, tell me all about you. And I know you're at Bath University and you've written a book. Just tell me about how you got on to writing your books and how you became an academic. Yeah, and tell me a little bit more about yourself.
Sure. Yeah. As you say, I am an academic at the University of Bath, and I work predominantly in two centres at the University of Bath. One is the Centre for Death and Society, and one is the Department for Education. I guess I teach about, write about, and research all sorts of things to do with human connection. One of which, I guess, is sort of the other side of the coin to human connection, loneliness, which is what we're going to talk about today. And so I'm interested in loneliness. I'm interested in human attachment, human connection, love, loss, even death. All of these sorts of existential topics are the sorts of things that I think about and research and teach my students about at the university and have done for maybe like 20 years. Why those topics capture me, I don't know that I have an easy answer to that. I've always just been fascinated by them, those topics, the existential, the deep ones that all humans are probably fascinated by on some level, but I just happen to be lucky enough to study them and write about them. So yeah, that's a brief introduction.
Wow, how did you get into studying them and writing about them?
Well, I mean, I started studying psychology. I did my PhD in psychology. Well, I guess psychology is like a really big house, or if you imagine the metaphor of it being a really big house, you enter it somewhere. And I guess I sort of entered it by the back door, but then you get a chance to wander around and you work out within psychology what intrigues me. And for me, it was always the big topics like love, loss, attachment, probably because I think they were the things that most affected my own life on a day-to-day level. And so I guess I was intrigued to understand them better than I did as just a human walking the face of the earth like everybody else. I just wanted to understand them a bit more. And I don't think some of those things are so mysterious and mystical that we never understand them fully. But I wanted to understand them better than I did before. So probably that.
And when did that start? Did it start when you were little, like in your teenagers or in your 20s or?
Well, I think maybe probably for me, growing up in a family that was quite, I would say maybe discombobulated. It was a family that was quite emotionally volatile. I think me as a child in that family had to become quite attuned to some powerful themes like loss, love, attachment, disruption, conflict. And maybe as a small child, I became sort of indoctrinated into those powerful themes and maybe fascinated by them on some level. So I think it probably comes from that somewhere at my start in life, which you might say sounds like it was quite a turbulent start, but at the same time, that's like a gift and a curse at the same time.
Yeah, I know that feeling.
Yeah.
I think all of us do, don't we? At some point in our lives, we learn how it feels to have that terminal hurt and feeling of like life's not what we thought it was. That sort of get being ripped apart to a certain extent. I think it happens to every human being in the world at some point in their life. It happens to them in the beginning of life, or it can happen right at the end or in the middle. But I think that's part of the human journey. Don't you think that?
Yeah. I definitely would say that I have yet to meet anyone who hasn't at some point in their journey experienced, yeah, turbulence, loneliness, loss, heartbreak. They're parts of being human. So I don't think we eradicate them. We just learn to be with them, maybe, or appreciate them as parts of our journey, just as much as all of the more joyous aspects of being human. For me, I think we need to learn that and appreciate that and understand that.
What made you write the book?
Well, actually, the book was I would say that was quite serendipitous. If you'd have asked me maybe 4 years ago, are you going to write a book on loneliness? I'd have said no. I worked on a project which we called the Loneliness Project, like 2019, 2020. And that project was solely about understanding older people's experiences of loneliness. And these were people that were probably in like, you probably would say that, I don't want to say the last lap of life in a sort of derogatory way, but they were in the final stretch of life, the last decade probably for most of them. And we were interested in, is loneliness kind of unique at different phases of the lifespan? Are there different characteristics to the loneliness you might feel as an older person compared to what you might have felt as a younger person? And absolutely, we did find that. But out of that project came so many stories of loneliness. And I think I wrote some articles and papers about that. And an agent just said, had you ever thought about writing a book on loneliness that sort of showcases some of these stories and many others? And the book was sort of born out of that sort of serendipitous encounter. And then I realized on some level, you know what, I've probably always been researching loneliness, but never really known that. Even when I'm looking at heartbreak or love or loss or death, loneliness is part of all of those experiences. So it's sort of maybe it recalibrated my own understanding of what do I look at? And often I'm looking at loneliness, but just even if I don't know that I am.
I really got that feeling from your book straight away because there were certain stories in there, and it made me think about how I felt about certain points of my life, and I didn't realize they were loneliness, but were. And
Right.
that really sort of like hit me. I was like, oh, I hadn't really thought about it in that way before. I just thought, I think I went by it more as a victim process at that stage. Do you know what I mean? Instead of realizing it was loneliness. And I think you really opened my eye to that, which was like really was like a light bulb moment this morning.
Yeah, I think it was for me too. You're right. I think I didn't necessarily think about explicitly my own experiences of loneliness, but it shows you just how present it is in most lifespans. But
Yeah,
you're right, we're not really looking at it or thinking about it. So often it just goes unspoken. Or unrecognized. And yeah, writing the book simply gave me the opportunity. I don't think I even intended to include my own stories when I started, but I realized, I have them in me too. So, and I obviously understand my own story better than I understand anyone's, so I might as well add my own in. So even that was quite an organic part of the book. It just sort of came as the book started being written.
did you feel quite vulnerable writing your own stories in there?
Yeah, honestly, I don't think I realized how a lot of people have said to me since, wow, I wouldn't have included my own stories, my own stories of loneliness if I was writing a book on it. But yeah, but I've also found a lot more people have been willing to share their own stories with me because they simply see me as somebody like them, not some sort of, I don't know what you'd call it, like expert or something who's detached from the phenomenon that they're actually writing about. So I've actually found that's been connecting. Yes, it is vulnerable to share your loneliness, but in a way, I feel like that might end up being the antidote to loneliness to some extent, or not the antidote, but the balm for loneliness might be we're going to have to be vulnerable enough to speak our own and
Yeah.
share it.
I think that's what I think that's what why your book's so powerful. That's how I thought why I felt it was so powerful because some of your stories, your own personal stories, were in there with other people's stories, and it just made that more like stronger connection. It was like, oh, this is actually real. Do you know what I mean? It's felt more normal and natural, and because it's quite triggering as well.
Right. How so? How do you mean by that? What do you mean by
I
that?
don't know. There's points of it that I like. I've not even finished the book yet, but for me personally, because it was a bit triggering. There was stories about being a child. Some of the stories about them being like your mum when she was young, and
Hmm.
about to go, and she had to sit when she was 11 plus about the grammar
Right.
school stuff. And
Mm.
that story in itself, I found that quite triggering from what I went through with education. And I just, yeah. And then the loneliness behind that. And I was like, oh, yeah. I hadn't really thought about it in that way. And yeah, it was really powerful for me anyway. So I thought I'd share that with you.
Yeah, I've definitely found that most people who read it will identify with one or two particular stories as being, it's not like a replica of their own story, but like you said,
Hmm.
it touches a button. And sometimes I guess that button might not have been touched before in some people. And so there's been a lot of people I've spoken to who have said, yeah, reading that particular story sort of awoke in me a realization that, oh my goodness, I had that experience or something very similar happened to me. And then there's the big debate, well, was it a good idea to awaken that beast or should we have just left it asleep? But my own belief is I think we're not going to make peace and resolve such things if we don't look at them, understand them, experience them.
Agree with that completely. 100%. I think also, yeah, I think childhood in itself can be really lonely. And I think a lot of as a parent, you don't realize how your child could be lonely without realizing it, you know? And I picked that up as well. I was just like, oh, like they could be lonely and I don't even know. How do I talk to them about that? Because especially when your family life's really sort of, it's chaos, it's busy and there's loads of stuff going on and people are coming and going. And my life's always been full of people, but even though it was full of people, I always felt out of place and alone. But I didn't realize, I just thought it was because of me being feeling different, but I didn't actually realize it was part of also being lonely and hiding parts of myself. That's just sort of come alive. And I was like, oh, does my children feel that way? And I don't even know. How do I approach that conversation with them? And yeah, with the people that I love around me, do they feel lonely? And I don't even know that because we're all just getting on with our day. Does it mean you're speaking to someone, they're not lonely?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point. And, when I was writing the book, my son would have been like 12, maybe 13. And I remember one night when I was writing the stories at the table, and he was sitting next to me doing his homework. And he often used to ask me to read him a story when it was finished, and I'd read him a story. Sometimes he liked the stories that were about our family because he could identify with the fact that I was his grandma or whatever. And I do remember the one night that he said to me, "Well, Dad, I'm lonely as well." And in me as a parent, when he said that, there was like an immediate spike of anxiety that, oh my goodness, my child feels lonely, which reflects this idea that I must have internalized, like everybody else, that loneliness is a sort of leprosy. But he then went on to talk about his own loneliness, and his story's in the book, actually, my son's. He talked about how simply for him at school, he didn't want to be noticed. So my son we would often joke about, why do you want the most boring packed lunch in the world? A digestive biscuit, a cream cracker, and a banana. He'd say, because if I have something more exciting, people will notice me. And if I'm noticed, there's a fear in that. And my son, he started to open up about how he navigated school by being as invisible as possible. The essence of his loneliness was that. And I guess for me, that created two things. One, at first, there was this barrier I had to get through that was, I thought as a parent, I'm supposed to be protecting him from that loneliness, but I'm not doing a very good job if he's experiencing it. But then later I realized that's not true. Like everybody, every other human, he will have his own cross to bear of loneliness. And it's not my job as a parent to eradicate that from his life, or nor is it possible. He has to go through that. And I guess he was really pleased to tell his story, actually. And in the end, strangely and paradoxically, this little kid that wants to be invisible couldn't be that invisible when his story is in my book, if you see what I mean. So it was a bit like it was therapy. It was therapy for him on some level. But yes, your point being, and I get that everyone's got it. So it's a bit like, my opinion is loneliness is as pervasive as breathing.
Yeah.
It's as fundamental to being alive as it is to breathe. So the idea that we shouldn't breathe would be ridiculous, as is the idea, I think, that we shouldn't feel lonely sometimes. It's not a leprosy or a disease, I don't think. It's just it's horrible sometimes, but it is part of even the people that we sit across the table with every night and have dinner with. They might not be telling us their story of loneliness. We might not be asking. So yeah, I think you make a great point there.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I just think I was just thinking as you were talking there, do you think there's different types of loneliness like there is of love? Like the loneliness as you feel as a child. I remember when I grew up, because I grew up in Portugal, and my parents used to own beach bars there, and I got two brothers, but I never had really a proper friend when I was growing up, as a young child, because I have a friend for a couple of weeks and they'll go back on a plane and fly back. So I never really had that sort of. So that's a different type of loneliness from a loneliness when I was a teenager. When I was at school, being dyslexic, I found I wanted to hide in the classroom because it meant that if I can hide, that means as your son, you're not noticed. That means I can get through the day without being picked on. That makes sense. And that's another type of loneliness. And then as an adult, you have another different type of different layers. And then I remember when someone passes away, of as well, like when my dad passed away, I noticed the loneliness he had
Mm,
in those last few moments,
yep.
leaving us and last few breaths. And that's a different type of loneliness too, isn't there? And that just it's sort of
Yeah.
quite an interesting process.
Again, I think that's a really good point. What comes to mind is that, yeah, one of the things I'd say is that the most extreme sort of response to that argument would be there are as many different types of loneliness as there are stories to be told. So in a way, every single one of them is different. They might have some similarities, but I would say that loneliness is a bit like a snowflake. Every single one of the stories I've ever heard are not quite the same. But if you want to be slightly snowflake-ish about it, you can say that, yeah, if you looked at it in sort of categories of loneliness, there are lots of different kinds. Like you just talked about, the loneliness of grief was a very common one I experienced when I talk to older people, for example, because many of them lose sort of long-term spouses, even identities get lost. Your whole life you were a teacher, but you're not anymore. And your wife's also gone, and your kids are not there anymore for you to be a parent every day to. So who are you? You're very lonely, but you still got an indefinite amount of time on this planet. So that was very common in older age, for example. But like you say, then there's lots of other sorts of loneliness. What comes to my mind is that somebody once said that the Inuit culture in like Alaska and sort of snowy landscapes, they have over 30 words for snow because one's not enough. There are lots of different kinds of snow. And so their language will reflect that. Whereas we just use the word snow, for example.
Yeah.
The same could be true for loneliness, right? We've got one word for it, but actually that's not enough because there are so many different elements or types or layers or complexities. I actually think that's true. I don't think we have anywhere like enough of a nuanced understanding of loneliness. And we're also so afraid of the concept that we don't really talk about it enough to have developed that language. We put it to bed, we hide it, and we bury the experience.
Do you think people are ashamed of being lonely? Like it's something that they have to hide deep inside themselves and can't admit to themselves or other people because that's something you can't do in if they
I do, and a lot of the evidence I have from that was simply anecdotal. When we did our loneliness project, there would be people who would sort of, I don't know, it was like they'd just hired a prostitute or something, and I was the prostitute coming around their house, and they were slightly ashamed of me, and they looked through the latch, and they say, "Are you the guy who's here to talk about loneliness?" They usher me in quickly, and there was a shame in them that they had this inside them. But once they started to tell the story, and it was received with no judgment and simply it is what it is, it's part of you. A lot of people did say that I'm so glad I actually opened the box and got my loneliness out and showed another human, because many of them hadn't shown any other human. And they'd never spoken about that. So it literally is locked inside you. And the value of unlocking that and sharing it with another human is, I don't know, there's something, the old classic phrase, a problem shared is a problem halved.
yeah.
It's kind of in that ballpark. And I do think the question I'd ask is, why are people ashamed of it? And I think that is the discourse we've created, that loneliness, like depression, anxiety, all sorts of other mental challenges are in some way a sign that you are defective or broken or ill, when actually that would be like saying breathing is an illness, if we go back to our point. So I think we've pathologized something that shouldn't have been pathologized. Not to say it can't be brutal and people don't need help, but it's not an illness. It doesn't mean anything terrible about you.
Do you think because sometimes people trap it so much inside themselves, because if they open the key to loneliness, that means they'll have to deal with other stuff, but because they've locked the key to it, and that sort of puts a layer on for anxiety, depression, and that's where all this academic of like mental health illnesses come from because they're locking that by going, do you think that's part of it?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, because if you lock it, you're trying to repress it then, aren't you? You're trying to keep this thing at bay. You also then have all of your thoughts about the fact that you have loneliness, i.e., it's something to be ashamed of. I'm probably broken. You worry about that. You worry about that fact too. That makes you feel bad. Your self-esteem can get dragged down. So the sort of cascading effects of simply thinking this means I'm broken, and you must be getting that idea from somewhere. And that probably is the dominant ideology in the society in which we live. So, yes, I do think that creates more harm than good. Yeah, to lock it away. But I don't blame people for locking it away. I mean, I wouldn't say that my son had locked it away, but he hadn't thought that anyone would be interested enough to know about his experience of loneliness. It didn't occur to him to talk about it to anyone. Why would it? Because we don't talk about loneliness on the street.
No.
It's not the thing you talk about to someone in the supermarket or anywhere, really. You don't talk about it with your family very often. And if you do, they're immediately going to say you should go to the doctor or whatever, or you need some help.
Do you think loneliness was less in the years ago than it is now because there used to be more of a community before and there was church and everyone used to go to church on Sunday and there was like, there was more community, wasn't there?
Yep,
And now the world's getting less and less daily community that people are feeling more and more lonely and more less connected to other people and having those chats with that old person down the street,
yep.
stuff like that.
I mean, it's very difficult for me to know. I mean, none of us can say that with certainty because we haven't really like measured everyone's loneliness 150 years ago versus now. But I do think, I mean, yeah, just anecdotally, you can say that the structure of the way we live is very, very different now than it was a few hundred years ago or even less than that. And so that might well shape our experiences of loneliness, disconnection differently. But I don't know the answer to whether we lonelier before than we are now. Definitely, I've heard the arguments that yeah, we were definitely not as lonely when years ago. But at the same time, when you think about the childhoods that
Yeah.
people might have had in Victorian eras or even before that, it doesn't sound like a very connected time for many people.
And that's,
Think about Oliver Twist or something.
yeah. And also, I suppose people weren't allowed to be themselves either, were they?
Right, right.
So yeah, in
Yep.
some ways they might seem be more connected, but actually maybe they weren't. They were pretending.
Yes. And that is like you going back to your previous point, there are different kinds of loneliness. A
Yeah,
common one that I come across is people might say, I'm really lonely in this marriage because I can't really be me.
yeah.
So all the time I'm sort of hidden behind a mask, and that's really lonely. So I'm never lonelier than I am in my marriage, or not just my marriage, but my family or whatever. So I think that's a form of loneliness that may have been quite abundant in previous societies gone by, and probably still is, but maybe not such a mass level. But again, that would be a huge generalization I can't verify. But yeah, that's an interesting point.
How did you get into wanting to know more about death? Tell me about that. You mentioned that slightly in the beginning.
Yeah, our university there aren't many universities in the UK with a sort of explicit centre that studies death. We have one at the University of Bath, and we sort of pull into that people who do all sorts of things. We don't just look at death and dying itself, but also we look at aging. So as in as people get closer to death, how do they experience that? And I think I got pulled into the Centre for Death and Society around that topic, sort of when people are growing old, what are their experiences of loneliness, etc. But as I was talking to people about loneliness in old age, death does inevitably crop up. So many people are quite afraid of the very fact that you kind of do have to walk through that door on your own. The final curtain, so to speak. You will be making whatever journey we make after this one into the next life, whatever that is, or whatever happens. No one can do that for you or with you. Yes, they can be by your bedside, but in terms of spiritually what you're doing and emotionally what you're doing, you're departing. And lots of people were existentially really quite afraid of that. Maybe didn't really feel that comforted by their family or friends who, yes, can say, don't worry, it's going to be all right, or we'll be here with you too. That doesn't take away the existential brutality of what you've got to do when you die. So death did seem to be something that a lot of older people who simply were grappling with the loneliness of being older always brought up in the topic of conversation. Often they may have seen their spouses die, their partners die, and that might have been for many of them the first experience they'd had of seeing another so close actually go through death. So death tends to be around as a sort of existential topic almost certainly when you're talking about loneliness and other things, frequently it does.
Do you think someone who has faith finds death a lot more easier than someone who hasn't?
In my experience, yes. That's simply, I'm saying that simply by having talked to people who seem to have, when you're saying faith, I'm guessing you mean sort of a religious faith of some kind, but
Be religious,
all others.
spiritual, it could be anything. I always think that people who have faith, it does seem to
Yeah,
pass a lot more easier without struggle than someone who has that like resistance and more
yeah.
scared.
Yeah, and that's definitely true in my experience. Certainly, the sense people seem to give me is they're less afraid because they genuinely believe that this is sort of part of a bigger journey, and they will be transitioning on to something else. And if you really truly believe that, I would imagine that definitely is a buffer.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah, I just remember like how I've seen a few people pass and it's the struggle of it. It's very quite powerful and scary for that person. And it's made me think about death quite a lot over the years. And I've realised that I'm not scared of death because I think to me I've had to deal with a lot of it. So I just feel that death's like also you've got different types of death. Like you've got different chapters. You grow and you change, then you
Right,
shed your skin. That's one type of death, isn't it? You're always upgrading. And then you've got death where you pass on, you leave your body. But to me, your spirit always lives on wherever that is.
right.
Become more one. That's how I feel. And I remember when my dad died, he really struggled through the passing on. He didn't want to leave us. But I just kept saying, there's a bridge. Do you see the bridge? Just go over the bridge. He's like, stopping to, and he came back and out. And in the end, because I'm quite a spiritual person, so I felt him in the end go over that bridge, but he went over with someone else. He helped this little boy over at the same time. It was pretty hardcore because the time that he passed, a boy up the road hanged himself at exactly the similar time. And my other brother saw that the police arrived and he walked back into the house, and that was, and I believe that I had this vision of my dad taking that boy over the bridge.
Hmm.
That was only the reason why he stopped struggling through his death. And that's just, I know it's quite bizarre, but I do believe that's when it's sort of there's those experiences and sees help each other and things in moments in time death help other people in different ways. I know it's really like deep, but
No, yeah, I think that's really interesting. I mean, what you also said about us experiencing sort of many deaths before we reach ultimate death. I think that's also true in a lot of people's loneliness that I've spoken to. The essence of it is basically that a sort of phase of their journey has finished and that person died. And they need to transition into the next them, the next version of themselves. And that doesn't happen overnight. You don't just wake up the next morning. It's a process. You're sort of walking through a desert. You've stripped yourselves of everything. Your relationship might have ended, your job might be gone, you're a new person, but you're not yet. So you're sort of becoming a new person. And there's no way that that can't be lonely. You got to let go of the past and you don't yet know what's in front of you. And so that's why I think that we got to expect that to be lonely. It's a desert, a little bit of a desert to cross. And we'll cross a few of those in the course of our lifetime. And we should expect that when we do, there'll be some loneliness in that. That doesn't necessarily, though, have to be awful. It's inevitable, probably. So yeah, I like that point that we die many times. And a lot of the older people that I was speaking to, they had lost all those things, they shed all those skins and they were waiting, they were thinking, well, what on earth is for me now? Who am I now? And they just didn't know how to wrestle with that.
yeah.
We're not prepared for it because I don't think society, education, our families, there's no real space in life that prepares you for that or even tries to. I'm not saying you can prepare for it perfectly, you can't, but at least to expect it.
I don't think you're meant to prepare for it though.
Uh,
That
Probably not.
that stops us from being human and
Yeah, right.
do you know what I mean? If we had to prepare for those experiences, then we won't get the lessons that we need to develop our soul or spirit. That's what we're here for. It's really important for us. I think we've got to stage in society where humans seem to think we have to have the answers to everything.
True.
And actually, the whole point, the magic about being alive and being a human and part of loneliness and death is not having the answers to everything. And we're not meant to. And I think we need to get out of this trapped that we need the answers to everything and we can't fall over and pick ourselves up. And there's different ways of picking yourself up, isn't there, from the loneliness and the deaths experiences and stuff. And it's sort of giving people the hand that they need so they can make those steps themselves. And what step's right for you doesn't mean it's going to be right for that person, but it's understanding that and giving them the space to make those steps for themselves. And I think that's where patience comes in and
Yeah.
where us humans have sort of seemed to have lost.
Yeah, what you're saying there really reminds me of one of my favorite psychologists is a guy called James Hillman. And I don't think he's still alive. He was a psychoanalyst and psychologist, and he used to say that when, for example, loneliness inevitably visits us in the course of our life, we've been sort of conditioned to make our first response to loneliness coming into our house. So just metaphorically speaking, our first response is, how can I get rid of it? Whereas he used to argue, our first response should be, what is it here to teach me? Why might it have visited me today? And what does that tell me about me and where I currently am on my journey? And if we have enough patience, loneliness therefore has an awful lot to bring us in terms of insight. It's here for a reason, not just randomly. It hasn't just descended. But you've got to be patient enough, robust enough, strong enough, accepting enough for us to really make use of that. But we don't make use of it if, like you say, we're just trying to, well, how do I get rid of it? What do I do? What pill can I take? That kind of notion. So yeah, I think what you're saying there reminded me of that.
That's interesting, isn't it? It's a beautiful topic that you're bringing back into people's, like, people to question and think about. And I think that's what I love about your book is it's making you think about things in a completely different way, not in a normal way, if that makes sense. Like a traditional way of loneliness is someone who's on their own, who hasn't
Mm,
talked to anyone in like a week, or who doesn't like talking to people,
yep.
or works on their own at home, or who never got married or had children, or they've that
Hmm.
sort of thing, or they're a grumpy old man or a grumpy old woman who doesn't
Yeah.
like I think that's like the traditional sort of sense of what people think loneliness is, isn't it? That like that person's done something wrong to be that's why they're lonely.
Yeah, exactly. That would be like the stereotype, wouldn't it? But often you will find that people who embody that stereotype are actually not lonely. They're actually quite happy in their own company and they're connecting with something. Often they're connecting with themselves really well and really comfortably. Yeah, frequently I have found that the stereotype is absolutely nothing like what the lived experience of loneliness looks like. And I know for myself, I'm a hermit. Deep down, I'm a hermit and I love nothing more than being alone for very, very long periods of time. That's when I will feel most alive, actually. That's not to disparage the people that I do connect with because I love connecting with them, but I also love being alone. I don't know about you, but I can find even something like the wind makes me feel less alone. Just sitting in the wind and listening to it or feeling it around me, it's a presence. I feel connected to it. And lots of people will say that when I'm out in nature in my own way, there's something I really connect to and I feel beautifully connected for a second, like I plug into something.
Yes, definitely in nature. And for me, it's the sea and rivers.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
yeah, yeah, definitely. I think we all have that connection with one part of the elements of the planet.
Yeah.
Choose and it calls you, doesn't it? You
Yeah,
kind
you
of,
can feel that at certain times, can't you? Particularly.
yeah, and it brings safety to that person.
Yeah.
Do you think that when people lose safety, that's when they start to feel loneliness the most?
Yeah, because I think there are maybe at least many people, because I think it's when we feel unsafe, that typically might be when we are encountering the unknown or something that genuinely makes us feel afraid. That's when I think we reach, well, attachment theory would argue, for example, that's when we are primed to reach for support, as in, is there somebody here in the dark with me because this is really frightening? So yes, often, and it does seem to be the case in from lots of psychological research, yeah, when we are most afraid or vulnerable, that's absolutely when we need to feel like there's somebody there. And that goes back to childhood, right? You know, when a baby is helpless and crying, it won't survive without contact with a
Yeah.
caregiver, for example. Literally, in evolutionary terms, it won't survive. So I think we're primed when we are really in a state of vulnerability to need some sort of care and support. But not everyone gets that.
No, they don't, do they? A lot of people will go through life of not getting that, which is
No.
that safety, which is sort of quite a scary experience for a lot of people. For me, I find that hard to imagine because I've always, I think the first experience I sort of really had of that is when I lost my father. And for the first time in my life, even though I was in my 40s when I lost him, I felt that my security blanket was taken away from me for the first time in my
Right.
whole life.
Right.
And it was because no matter what happened in my life, I know that my father will always be there. Do you know
Mhm.
what I mean? And suddenly
Yes.
that was taken away from me. And I think that's like that security, that loneliness. And it was quite hard to explain that to people because a lot of people didn't have a good relationship with their
Yep.
father. And
Mm.
I'm one of those unique people that had had an amazing relationship, or still have, with my father. And so I found it hard to express that to people
Yeah.
because and I found that lonely because yeah, and I didn't realize how precious and lucky I was to experience that until I started trying to explain that to friends or and to people that I know. And they go, "Oh, I know, I don't really didn't understand that experience because I didn't have never experienced it." That was
Ye-
lonely in itself.
Yeah, I mean, when you're speaking, sort of metaphor that comes into my head is that, if life is like a big, potentially perilous ocean that we're all floating around in,
Yeah,
somebody like your dad is like the ship that you're sailing in. They keep you safe from the perilous ocean. But once suddenly that ship's gone and you're just plonked in the ocean without the ship, you immediately know, my God, this is more scary. And I feel way more alone than I did when that ship was there. And that's the essence of having what we would call an attachment figure, which is somebody in this world, maybe it's more than one person, who we can sort of rely on to sail. You
yeah,
know, and that doesn't necessarily mean in a dependency kind of way, just that they're there if I need them.
yeah,
They're in the wings.
yeah. I wasn't. Yeah, it was definitely not a dependency because I've always been quite independent and stubborn
Mhm.
and gone off into the world to do my own thing.
Yeah.
But it was always that in the background. It was like, oh, it doesn't really matter if anything goes wrong because I know that I'll be catched. You know what I mean? Suddenly my husband, I know my husband always will catch me, but it's not the same thing as a parent figure.
Right.
It's a completely different thing, which is quite interesting.
And I think one of the hard things about losing that, again, somebody once wrote about this in the context more of heartbreak, but you could easily apply this to grief in relation to a parent as well, was that strangely, even though not everybody, most people lose important people in their lives, the one thing that makes it so lonely is that nobody has ever or will ever lose exactly what you lost. So, in relation with your dad, yes, other people have lost their dads, but you and your dad are like a unique abstract painting that will never be replicated ever again and never has been before. So in a way, we lose something that was a one-off. And saying that in the infinite universe we live in is amazing. That was a one-off relationship and only you lost it. So there's a real uniqueness to that and something quite lonely about the fact that yeah, other people were hurt because they lost important relationships, but they don't know what I lost exactly. They don't know exactly what I lost.
Something quite beautiful about that.
Yes, there is. There's a beauty in that.
Because I know that my brothers had the same relationship as with my dad, so they
Mhm.
lost a quite similar thing. But theirs was completely unique to them too. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. It is, isn't it? It doesn't matter who it is.
No, it doesn't matter. We do go on often to transition into other relationships that sort of play the role of keeping us safe again, but they're not the same ones. They're not the same ones. And we're not the same us, is the other interesting thing, right?
Yeah, with we have shredded our skins, as I say.
Yes. Yeah.
So, what other books have you written?
Well, that was my first book that I wrote really for a public audience. It's not meant for academics per se, it's meant for everyone. I've written books before that are what I would call classic academic books. I wrote one on attachment and one actually on motivation and education, but they're very much books that no one's going to read unless they're studying those topics, you know. But I feel like I'm moving into a phase of my writing career where I find it much more valuable to write for everyone than just for students or academics or scholars. So, and definitely from the loneliness book, that has really been reinforced for me. I think I will continue to write for such audiences. And also, I think stories are a really important thing. I think the thing about that book that I really loved was that I wasn't telling everyone about loneliness. I was just listening to people's story. People were telling me about it, right? They were telling me what it is. And I much prefer that as a way of understanding phenomenon. We live in a world, I think, where the expert is sort of, I think they're overvalued. Whereas I think deep down inside, we all know what our loneliness is. We don't need someone to tell us. So the book was about that too.
I think your book just has the connection for people to think about it. And it felt that it doesn't matter who's reading it, everyone will have a connection to your book. And I think that's a really beautiful thing to do. It's not an easy thing to achieve, actually.
No. And again, that goes back to the point, I don't think I even set out to do it. It's as though sometimes these things come into the world because they're ready to at the right time, aren't they? They just
Yeah.
sort of they just happen. And the universe has a way of weaving that and putting that together.
Do you think motivation is connected as well to it? Because if you're lonely in a certain way, it might motivate you to be a certain way or
Yeah, in so many ways, motivation and loneliness are connected. There are people, for example, who lose all motivation and libido for life when they feel lonely. You know, they sort of shrink into loneliness. A bit like we were saying, they're usually in one of those deserts, but they sort of just sit down in the middle of it and give up, and many people struggle through those transitions in life, and motivation and the lack of it is a common experience at that point.
do you think it's because motivate? Do you think motivation could be taught, or do you think that's something that is an inner strength people have? I always
I
wonder
mean,
about that.
well, in psychology, there are lots of psychologists, and again, it depends on who you're talking to, who think motivation, for example, big organizations will hire psychologists because they're saying, well, how can we motivate our employees to work hard every single day? Or schools, even. How can we make all of our kids sit in front of us, keen to learn and want to do this stuff? Because they don't right now. So there are lots of psychologists and people who would like to think that motivation can be created, as in conjured up. It can, but I would say it depends. You can make people do something by putting a gun to their head and they'll likely do it. So you've got to think about what's the motivator? What's the motivator? And I think that for me, there was a guy, a famous sort of ish psychologist, Joseph Campbell. He used to say that he always said to his students, the key to your motivation is to follow your bliss. He used to say, your bliss, you will know what that is. It's the thing that lights you up, whatever that may be. If you follow that, then your motivation will always be there. He used to say, but very, very frequently we do not follow our bliss in so many different senses.
Yeah, that's because I think that's another reason for loneliness, isn't it? Because people are not following they're not like
Yes,
listening to what they actually want to do or their intuition, they're not listening to their intuition, so they're lonely.
right. That's very true. And so that sort of that part of you that really wants you to listen to it, which I think is coming from what some psychologists would call soul, the depth of you. If you don't listen to that and continue not to listen to it and continue to follow those pathways of kind of I should, I should be doing this, but I don't want, but I should. There will be a lonely part deep, deep, deep inside of you that hasn't been allowed to be birthed, hasn't been allowed out. The one that wants you to follow your bliss. So a lot of people I've seen, some of them very, very old, who've lived entire lives not following their bliss.
It's heartbreaking.
Yeah, it kind of is heartbreaking. Yeah,
I think also society and schools teaches people to stop this, don't listen to your intuition.
yeah,
And I was chatting to a 20-year-old boy the other week, and I was thought you need to start listening to your intuition. He goes, I don't. What do you mean? No, you don't listen to your intuition. You think. And I was like, no, think. No, you need thinking is one part of who you are, but that's not who you are. Your intuition is who you are. And he was looking at me like I had three heads. More depth. I was like, okay, so point me, we can go in here for you. Yeah, you're still too it's been smashed out of you for all.
But you're right, and that's somebody who's only 20.
Yeah,
And
and
it's
it was quite heartbreaking. I was like, wow, you're 20 years old and you've decided to give up on what you think you want. And I thought that was really sad.
But I think that also reflects, like you said a second ago, simply how I think Carl Jung used to talk about like the thinking function and the feeling function that we have. The feeling one being those sorts of intuitive ideas that we're very tuned into when we're born. You know, we come into the world very instinctive. We're governed by instinct. But by 20, like your example shows, all of that instinct has been sort of
Smashed out.
bludgeoned out of us. And so we're out of touch with our instincts until very often midlife when they sort of burst out of us because they're not going to be repressed anymore.
Yeah.
So
A bit of a breakdown, don't you?
frequently,
You're like, no, this is not what have I been doing for the past 20 years of my life? Yeah, I know. It's interesting. It's one of the things I always say to my children when they go off to school, listen to your intuition, listen to your heart. And they get really annoyed that I say that to them. But I think I have to say that to them every day because they need to listen to that side of themselves, because otherwise they will be that 20-year-old boy that I mentioned that is starved himself really from it. And I think education does that.
yep.
It's, because you have to tick the boxes to get through the day. And I think that's something that needs, it's sort of been smashed out of them to no, you can't listen to that. This is facts only, which is really sort of quite, I think that needs to change. And I think that's where loneliness becomes dangerous, I think.
How so? How do you see that?
Because if you don't listen to if it's been smashed out of your intuition and your bliss and what you're meant to be here for, then that loneliness turns into something even a bit more scarier, to the point where that person feels desperate and so lost and so
Mm.
starving that they go to the other side of where they might even consider suicide.
Right. Yeah.
And it's that fine, that line is.
Yep.
And that's where that darkness, that's where that line comes, that's where that line twists over.
Yeah.
And that's the bit, and that's when they give up.
Yeah. I mean, that's a nice way to put it. I hadn't thought of it that way, but yeah.
Yeah, I've seen it a few times. That
Mm.
it's like a little, I can visually, it's like a string of line, this like it's a bit thicker, it just this twists like that,
Mhm.
and it's so subtle. Yeah,
Yeah.
much over a time, but sad. So yeah, it's being themselves. I've enjoyed our conversation.
Yeah, me too, Joni. Thank you so much for your questions and your thoughts and ideas. It's been great. Are your kids school age? Oh, so they're
Yeah,
on holiday now?
yeah, I'm
Yeah.
doing that whole thing, working,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, doing the balancing act of mother guilt, all that.
Where are you? Where are you in the country?
I'm in Mendips,
Oh, you're
basically.
not that far away
No,
then.
not
Yeah.
at all. No, yeah,
Mm.
yeah. No, I'm just like 20 minutes from Bath, basically.
Oh, okay, same. I'm like, oh, well, I'm 10 minutes from Bath, but I'm like more Wiltshire. So
You're the other side. Yeah.
yeah, other side, other side. Yeah, but I've got my son has just gone to America for 3 weeks, so I am luckily I'm just having a nice quiet 3 weeks with no
Thanks.
children, no parenting for a little bit, which is actually quite nice.
How old is he?
Well, he's 16 now, so it's a little different. Well, you're probably noticing it's like it changes in quality, doesn't it? The older they get, it's not it's draining in different ways. The older they get, but
Um,
16 is still needs me.
It's the emotional support they need.
Yeah,
That's the
yeah,
bit. There's the emotional guidance that you need to give them, but also give them the freedom to make the mistakes that they need to make without judgment, which is really quite
yeah,
hard to do.
yeah. It is
The balance that you need to find as parents as they hit, like, yeah, my son started getting a little bit independent and going off to meet his friends and going to the
right.
park and stuff like that. And
What is
it's
he like? Year 8 or 9 or something? Yeah.
year 8 going into year
Okay.
9.
Yeah, that's the age that kind of happens. I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. You're like, oh, who's he going to meet up with? Maybe he's actually safer on the computer games. I don't know. It's a question. Don't think we do know. Oh, it's lovely chat. What's your next book about? Have you got a new book?
Well, again, I want to make sure that the next book that I write doesn't feel like I'm writing it for the sake of writing it. And I would like it to come to me naturally. Someone did come to me the other day and asked about writing a short book, which is a sort of guide, the seven myths of loneliness. Because there are lots of myths about loneliness, like people are always the solution to it, or it only happens to people who are sick, or loneliness is a pathology, and so on. There are lots of myths about loneliness. They asked about writing a book that sort of puts those myths very simply so that people can understand very basic, the sort of ones you find on Waterstone's counter,
Yeah,
the
yeah,
little kind of books.
yeah. Oh, that's a really good idea.
Might be that, but another possibility my agent and I are talking about is just stories, again, stories from older people at the very end of their lives about the wisdom they would pass on to younger generations, looking back on the journey that they've had. The idea being that almost every older person has an awful lot of wisdom inside them that gets unlooked at. So maybe that too, but I've not decided which one I'll focus my efforts on yet. I probably will let that come to me.
The wisdom one's a really good one because you're right. There's everyone's got wisdom inside them that never gets told. In
Yeah,
the olden days, they used to sit around the fire, and the older generation used to tell stories about their wisdom.
exactly.
That doesn't exist anymore.
No, and often older people get segregated from society, don't they? So yeah, so probably one or both of those will be next. But I like to do it when I feel like the ball is rolling downhill rather than I'm pushing it uphill. And at the minute, I'm waiting for that to happen.
It'll come to you when the right time happens.
Yeah, it will.
I was just thinking because a lot of people do. Because I was just out of loneliness. Do you think like I've got like one or two female friends who stay in relationships because they're scared of being lonely. Do you think a majority of people in life start like basically trap themselves in relationships because they're too scared to be on their own and feel the loneliness that there's inside them, which will just they need to feel, but they're too scared to do so.
Yeah, and in that kind of situation, it's a bit like you're choosing the lesser of two perceived evils. One of them is this terrifying lonely space that being alone would create for you. And you would have to then go through the desert, right? You have to walk through that desert, which is terrifying, versus the relatively unpalatable but at least known current situation I'm in. And a lot of people just choose the lesser evil. But in the end, I think what people don't remember is the other side of that desert. There's usually transition and new you, a
Yeah.
new version of you. So yeah, I think that's common. People just are afraid of the loneliness and what it might create. And it's often we have to be pushed into that. Many of us don't have a choice. I know in my own situation, frequently relationships have ended because I've been forced into the ending. Then you're pushed into the desert, right? You're sort of exiled into it, and then you have no choice. But when you have a choice, often people choose the lesser evil. And I wouldn't judge them for that because I get it. It's terrifying sometimes, the desert.
Yeah, the desert. I always choose a desert. I'm one of those annoying. Yeah, I always do. I
Right.
can't help myself. I always have to like, yeah, go through it. Because I know if I don't go through it, it's just going to destroy me in a different way. So I always choose to just go straight forward. But I know a lot of people find that really hard to do and scared to do. And then there's loneliness in itself going through the desert all the time on your own. But what they don't realize is that as you're going through the desert on your own, you pick up people on the way because
Absolutely.
you've let go of the old, so
Yeah.
you bring in the new, and
Mm.
actually loneliness starts to disappear because you've connected with the right people.
Yep.
Desert.
Absolutely. Yeah. But you've got to start that process.
Yeah. I think the first time you go through it on your own, it's hard, and then the second time gets a bit easier.
Yep.
And after a while, you're like, oh, I've got to go through the desert again. Bugger it.
Yeah.
But it's okay. I'll leave it in that note. So
Great. Well,
where
thanks
do,
so much.
where can people find you?
Usually, if you just Google my University of Bath profile, so just Sam Carr, University of Bath. That's where usually everything will pop up. So that's where they can find me. And
And
my email address is there as well, my contact details and the book, things that I've written on these things. Yeah, that's probably the best place.
and also your book's on Amazon as well, isn't it?
Yeah, it's on Amazon and Audible, I think. So yeah, it can be found there. Yeah.
So we'll put a link at the bottom of it for the books.
Great. Thank you. That's great.
Yeah, so they can find the book at least and find you. All right, it's nice to meet you.
You
Have a
too,
nice
Jenny.
day, and
Thanks
thank
so
you
much.
so much for your time. I appreciate it
Not a
loads.
problem. Lovely to meet you.
Love you too.
All
Bye.
right. Take care. Bye.